There is an issue with your boarding pass. No, I believe you have the wrong information. You don't belong here, sir.
I believe I do.
Get out! I am not serving you.
Excuse me?
You heard me. Get out of my sight.
You aren't allowed to be here.
You are not allowed to be here. This is my aisle. Move. I am in my assigned seat. Check.
You need to move now, sir.
You are causing a scene. I haven't done anything. Stop touching me. Get out of the aisle right now, or we're calling security. Don't make this worse. Is there a problem here? No, there is not a problem here.
Boots. Sir, be grateful you're even sitting up here. The sandwich landed on Marcus Dunmore's tray table with a small, wet slap. Boots. The bread had gone soft at the corners. Along the crust, a thin ring of green had bloomed like something forgotten at the back of a refrigerator for a week too long. Boots. Beside it sat a paper cup of apple juice, already warm, condensation beating on the outside, like it had been poured an hour before anyone thought to bring it out. Boots. For one full second, nobody in the cabin moved. Not the man in 2C swirling a glass of champagne he hadn't earned the patience to drink slowly. Boots. Not the elderly couple in 3A and 3B, murmuring over a wine list they'd already memorized. Not the flight attendant standing over Marcus with a smile stretched a half-inch too wide to be anything but deliberate. Boots. There you go, she said. That should be enough. Her name tag read Deborah Voss, 46 years old, blonde hair pulled into a chignon so tight it looked painful. A Highland Regional Air scarf knotted at her throat with the precision of a woman who had spent 2 decades learning exactly how to smile while she judged you. Boots. Her eyes were the kind of blue that looked warm in photographs and cold in person. Marcus looked down at the tray. Boots. Then he looked up at her. He did not raise his voice. He did not move his hands from the armrests. Boots. At 54 years old, Marcus Dunmore had learned, the hard way, more times than he could count, that anger was a gift you handed to people who were already looking for a reason to hurt you. Boots. Especially when you were a black man in seat 2A, on a ticket some people in this cabin still believed he must have won, borrowed, or stolen. Boots. Is there a problem? Deborah asked. He heard the real question underneath it. Are you going to make this difficult for me? Boots. No, he said quietly. Not yet. Her smile tightened by exactly 1 degree, and she turned before he could say another word, moving up the aisle toward the galley curtain, like a woman who had already decided how this story would end. Boots. Rewind 6 minutes. The gate area at Fulton Regional International, outside Atlanta, had smelled like burnt coffee and jet fuel, the particular perfume of every airport at 6:52 in the morning. Boots. Marcus had walked to the gate the way he always did. Plain navy overcoat, no tie, a battered leather satchel slung across one shoulder that had been resoled twice and refused to die. Boots. Nothing about him said money. Nothing about him said power. That was, as it happened, exactly the point. He'd boarded early, found his window seat, opened his tablet to a stack of quarterly reports he had no intention of finishing, and ordered nothing but a black coffee, please. No rush. Boots. He hadn't told the gate agent his name mattered. Boots. He hadn't told the flight crew that 3 years earlier, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Charlotte, he had personally wired $11 million of his family's investment fund into Highland Regional Air's fleet modernization program. New leather, new galleys, new training standards. A company he believed could still be saved from its worst instincts if somebody with real skin in the game bothered to watch it up close. Boots. He was not flying today as an investor. He was flying as a passenger. Seat 2A, Fulton to Denver. A quiet 2.5-hour window to review board packets before a 3P. Boots. M-call. Maybe if the flight went smoothly, 1 pour of the Macallan 18 he'd pre-ordered along with his meal. Boots. The satchel on his shoulder had belonged to his father, Otis Dunmore, a man who had spent 31 years driving a delivery truck out of a depot in East Point, Georgia, and who had never once, in all those years, been allowed to sit in the front of anything that mattered. Boots. Otis used to say it plainly, at the kitchen table, over coffee gone cold. They will let you carry the bag before they let you sit in the seat. Boots. Marcus had carried plenty of bags. He'd built a fund from nothing, backed distressed companies nobody else wanted to touch, and quietly bought his way into rooms his father had never been permitted to enter. Boots. He still flew coach half the time, out of habit more than necessity. But when he did fly first class, he never once forgot why the seat mattered more than the champagne in it. Boots. That morning before boarding, he'd called his mother, Eunice, 81 years old and sharp as a blade, still living in the same house in East Point where Marcus had grown up. Boots. She'd asked him, as she always did, whether he was eating enough on these trips. He'd told her he was about to have a very nice breakfast on the plane. Boots. He had no idea, standing at the gate with his coffee, how wrong that sentence was about to become. Instead, at 7:14 Boots. Before the aircraft had even pushed back from the gate, he was staring at Mold. His phone buzzed once against the tray table. Boots. A text from Priya Nakamura, his executive assistant of 9 years safe flight. Board deck is final. Call me if Denver runs long. Boots. He typed back with 2 fingers, unhurried, documenting a service issue on Flight 219. Stand by. Then he set the phone face down and folded his hands. Boots. Around him, the cabin hummed with the sound of comfort being served correctly to everyone except him. Warm bread, seared halibut, plated the way the menu had promised. Boots. Wine poured with the kind of unhurried care that told you the person doing the pouring had been trained to make rich people feel important. Boots. Somewhere behind him, a man laughed about a golf trip to Hilton Head. Marcus did not touch the sandwich. He studied it the way a surgeon studies an X-ray, carefully, without flinching, cataloging exactly what was there before deciding what to do about it. Boots. The green stain was small. It would be easy, for anyone who wanted it to be easy, to call it nothing. Boots. A trick of the light. An overcooked crust. That was always how these things survived. Not because anyone truly believed the excuse, but because everyone found it more comfortable than the alternative. Boots. One bad moment could always be explained away. A pattern could not. He pressed the call button. A soft chime sounded above his seat. Boots. Deborah, 3 rows up, glanced toward the sound and kept walking. Watch her hands. They will matter later. Every time she reaches for that tablet at her hip, she's about to make a decision that isn't really about a meal. Boots. 5 minutes passed. Then 7. He pressed the button a second time. This time Deborah turned from the aisle, with an expression that had already decided he was the problem, before she'd taken a single step back toward him. Boots. Yes, sir. Her voice was pitched low enough to sound professional and sharp enough to cut. Marcus lifted the edge of the bread with his fork. Boots. There's mold on this, he said, calm as a man reading off a grocery list. I also pre-ordered the chef's plate when I booked. Boots. I have the confirmation on my phone if you'd like to see it. Deborah barely glanced down. I don't see any mold. Boots. The sentence landed harder than it should have. She wasn't disputing a sandwich. She was asking him to distrust his own eyes, a small, familiar cruelty, one that had a very long history behind it, older by far than either of them. Boots. He turned the tray a few degrees so the green ring faced the aisle, where the light was better. It's right there. Boots. Her jaw tightened by a fraction most people wouldn't have caught. Sir, if you're unsatisfied with what's available, I can bring you something from the back. Boots. The back. Robert Kessling, seated across the aisle in 2C, set his fork down with a small, deliberate click. He was 71, silver-haired, the kind of man who had run 3 companies and buried 2 friends, and had long ago stopped wasting breath on anything he didn't mean. Boots. He said nothing yet, but his eyes moved from Marcus's tray to his own halibut, and back again, and something in his face folded into a shape that looked a great deal like recognition. Boots. I'm asking for the meal I paid for, Marcus said. The same service everyone else in this cabin already has. Boots. Deborah leaned in. Her perfume was floral and cold, like a room freshener sprayed over something that had already gone bad. Boots. Not everyone gets exactly what they want the moment they want it, she said. Sometimes people need to be grateful for what's available. Boots. The cabin seemed to draw a breath and hold it. Marcus felt his pulse tick once in his throat, not fear. Boots. Control. He had heard versions of the sentence his entire adult life. In hotel lobbies and bank branches, in boardrooms where he was the only person in the room who had to prove twice that his name really was on the deed. Boots. Be grateful. Be quiet. Don't ask for the same thing too loudly. He looked up at her, and his voice did not rise even a single note. Boots. I'm not asking for special treatment, he said. I'm asking for equal treatment. For the first time, the polish on Deborah Voss's face slipped, not into guilt, not into concern, but into something colder and more honest. Boots. Annoyance. The particular annoyance of a woman who has just watched someone say out loud the thing she'd been counting on nobody naming. Boots. A younger flight attendant appeared behind her shoulder, name tag reading Tyler Grissom. "Everything all right up here?" he asked, though his eyes had already picked a side before he'd finished the sentence. Boots. Deborah crossed her arms. "This passenger is unhappy with his meal and becoming argumentative. I have not raised my voice once," Marcus said. Boots. "I pointed out spoiled food and asked for the meal I ordered." Tyler glanced at the sandwich for less than a second. Boots. "Meal availability can shift mid-flight, sir. We're still at the gate." Silence. Robert Kessling made a low sound in his throat, almost a cough, not quite. Boots. The woman in 3C, reading a paperback in a navy cardigan, lowered her book 2 inches, her eyes moving between Marcus and the flight attendants, like she was watching something she already suspected she'd regret staying quiet about. Boots. "That is not the point," Deborah said. "No," Marcus answered. "I think it's exactly the point." His phone buzzed against the tray table again. Boots. He didn't reach for it immediately. Deborah's eyes flicked to the screen, then back up to his face. A small, involuntary tell. The kind people don't notice they're giving away. Boots. Tyler stepped closer and dropped his voice, the way people do when they want witnesses to hear only half of what's being said. Boots. "Sir, I need you to cooperate with the crew. We've got a full cabin and we can't have disruptions in first class." Boots. And there it was. The word disruption, dropped into the air like a stone into still water. The shift from passenger to problem, from customer to threat, happening in real time, in front of 11 other people who all somehow managed to find something else to look at. Boots. Marcus picked up the phone and read Priya's message. Initial poll found prior complaints re premium cabin service on HRA. Boots. Several named Deborah Voss, specifically. More coming. He set the phone face down again, slower this time. "Please bring the purser," he said. Boots. Deborah gave a short laugh through her nose, the kind that isn't really a laugh at all. Tyler's jaw hardened. Boots. Behind them, through a gap in the galley curtain, another crew member watched, half hidden. The way people watch a car accident they're relieved isn't theirs. Boots. The aircraft had not left the gate, but something had already started leaving the ground. The purser arrived wearing the particular expression of a woman whose entire job, that morning, had become making a problem disappear, without ever once touching the truth of it. Boots. Her name was Karen Ashby, late 40s, dark hair pinned back with military precision, a tablet clutched against her ribs like a shield she'd learned to carry for exactly this reason. Boots. "Mr. Dunmore," she said, glancing at her screen before she even looked at him. "I understand there's some concern about your meal." Boots. Concern. Marcus noted the word the way you note a fingerprint at a scene. Not complaint, not spoiled food, not discrimination. Boots. Concern. A word soft enough to disappear into a report and never be found again. "This was served to me in first class," he said, gesturing at the tray. Boots. "The bread is spoiled. I also never received the meal or the beverage I pre-ordered." Karen's eyes dropped for half a second, and in that half second, something in her face betrayed her completely. Boots. She saw it, the green ring, the curling crust, the warm juice sweating in its paper cup. Then, just as fast, her expression smoothed back over like water closing above a stone. Boots. "I apologize if the presentation didn't meet expectations," she said. Robert Kessling leaned back slowly, his eyes narrowing to a point. Boots. "This is not a presentation issue," Marcus said. "Of course. What I can do," Karen offered, "is bring you something fresh from our business class selection once we're airborne." Boots. The offer hung in the air like a smaller insult dressed up as generosity. "Why business class?" Marcus asked. "This is a first-class ticket." Boots. "Everyone around me received first-class service. Why am I being offered a downgrade after I was served spoiled food?" Boots. A few heads turned. The woman in 3C had stopped pretending to read entirely. A young man near the window lowered his headphones half off one ear. Boots. Even the elderly couple across the aisle had gone quiet in a way that felt less like discretion and more like an audience settling into their seats. Boots. Karen felt the cabin listening, and her smile thinned by a hair. "Mr. Dunmore, we are doing our best to accommodate you." Boots. "No," Marcus said softly. "You're trying to quiet me." The sentence landed clean and flat, and nobody in the cabin pretended not to hear it. Boots. Deborah's eyes flashed. Karen's voice dropped lower. "Sir, I need you to be mindful of the cabin environment." "The cabin environment was calm," Marcus said, "until I asked why I was being treated differently than everyone around me." Boots. Tyler stepped forward. "Sir, that's not what's happening here." "Then tell me what is happening." Tyler opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Boots. Because the facts were sitting right there on the tray table between them. The mold, the paper cup, the missing order, the warmth extended to every other passenger in the row and withheld from exactly one. Boots. Deborah broke the silence first. Some passengers simply have more detailed profiles with us, she said. We prioritize our frequent premium flyers. Boots. Marcus looked at her for a long, level second. I'm a Diamond Elite member. I have flown this airline 11 times this year alone. Boots. Karen's thumb moved across the tablet almost on instinct. Her eyes scanned, then stopped. There it was, the record, plain and undeniable. Boots. Marcus Dunmore, Diamond Elite, Seat 2A, Macallan 18, Chef's Plate, full first-class fare paid in cash, no voucher, no upgrade, no mistake anywhere in the system. Boots. Karen's throat moved. Deborah saw the tablet too, and for one flickering second, real uncertainty crossed her face. Then pride closed back over it like a door. Boots. Well, Deborah said, almost under her breath, status doesn't always mean people know how to act. Robert Kessling set his napkin down with the kind of deliberate care that draws every eye in a room. Boots. Excuse me, he said. Everyone turned. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a man who had run boardrooms, buried friends, raised children, and long ago stopped wasting his breath on things he didn't mean. Boots. I have watched this man since he boarded. He has been polite. He has not raised his voice once. He has asked reasonable questions. Boots. And from where I'm sitting, he has been treated in a way nobody else in this cabin has been treated. Boots. Karen's face tightened. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but crew matters are handled by the crew. Then handle it properly, Robert said. Boots. The cabin went completely still. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, nothing so simple as relief. Boots. Something quieter. The particular comfort of not being alone in a room, built to make you feel that way. Deborah leaned toward Karen and murmured, just under her breath, he's making everyone uncomfortable. Boots. But the overhead galley microphone caught it. So did 3 separate phones in the cabin, held low, angled up, recording without a sound. Boots. So did Marcus. He picked up his phone and typed one line to Priya. Pull every complaint involving Deborah Voss, Tyler Grissom, and premium cabin discrimination on this route. Boots. Loop legal in quietly. The reply came back almost before he'd set the phone down. Already started. HR Director Renata Castellanos standing by. Boots. Karen forced one last smile, thinner now, like fabric stretched too far. Mr. Dunmore, we will review everything after we depart. Boots. For now, please accept the business class option. Marcus looked at the tray, then at the passengers watching him, then back at Karen. Boots. No, he said. One word, flat, clear, and final. I want this documented before we leave the gate. Deborah laughed softly, a sound with no warmth left in it at all. Boots. Tyler's shoulders stiffened. Karen's face went the color of old paper. And somewhere beyond the cockpit door, a version of this story that had never happened was already being carried forward to a man in a captain's uniform. Boots. Captain Wade Holloway came down the aisle, like a man walking into a problem he had already decided how to solve before he'd heard a word of it. Boots. 58 years old, broad through the shoulders, silver at the temples, with the kind of face built by 3 decades of being obeyed on command. Boots. Passengers straightened as he passed. Crew stepped aside without being asked. In an aircraft cabin, a captain doesn't need volume. Boots. He owns the room simply by entering it. Deborah stood near the galley with her arms folded, wearing wounded professionalism like a second uniform. Boots. Tyler hovered beside her, jaw set. Karen held her tablet in both hands, eyes carefully avoiding the tray on 2A's table. Boots. Mr. Dunmore, Holloway said, stopping beside the seat. My crew tells me you're refusing service and creating a disturbance before departure. Boots. Marcus looked up slowly. The cabin lights caught in his eyes. His hands stayed flat and calm on the armrests. Boots. That's not accurate, Captain. Behind him, Deborah exhaled. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Holloway heard it and took it instantly, as confirmation of everything he'd already decided to believe. Boots. I understand you're unhappy with your meal, the captain said, but I have a full aircraft, an assigned departure window, and federal regulations requiring passenger compliance with crew instructions. Boots. I understand federal regulations, Marcus said. I also understand that asking why I was served spoiled food is not a safety violation. Boots. A murmur ran through the first-class cabin. Holloway's eyes finally dropped to the tray, landed on the sandwich, and moved away again almost immediately, as though seeing it too clearly might complicate the version of events he'd already decided to defend. Boots. Food concerns can be handled through customer care after we land, he said. Robert Kessling leaned forward. Captain, with respect. The man is not exaggerating. Boots. Holloway turned to him, his expression softening by exactly 1 degree. Sir, I appreciate your input, but I need passengers to remain seated and let my crew do their jobs. Boots. Robert's mouth flattened into a thin line. He sat back, but his eyes stayed on Marcus, and the difference in how the captain had spoken to each of them, courtesy for one, command for the other, was not lost on a single person in that cabin. Boots. Something old and familiar rose in Marcus's chest. Not surprise. He was never surprised anymore. Only the particular exhaustion of having to prove the obvious while staying calm enough for anyone to believe him at all. Boots. Captain Holloway, Marcus said, before you make any decision, I'd like you to review what actually happened here. I was denied my pre-ordered beverage, served a downgraded meal, given spoiled bread, and when I questioned it, I was described as disruptive. Boots. That's not true, Deborah cut in. He's been challenging us since he boarded. I asked for the service I paid for. Boots. You kept pressing the call button, Tyler said, because no one answered it. Enough. One word. Hard. Final. The captain's hand went up and the cabin fell silent, so completely the engine hum seemed to grow louder in the gap. Boots. Somewhere behind the curtain in economy, a baby cried once and quieted. Outside the oval window, a ground crew cart rolled past under a gray Atlanta sky. Boots. Holloway leaned closer to Marcus. Sir, I'm going to give you a clear instruction. Accept the accommodation offered by the purser. Boots. Stop questioning my crew. Allow this flight to depart. Marcus held his gaze without blinking, and if I don't stop asking why I was treated differently than everyone else in this cabin. Boots. Holloway's expression hardened into something final. Then I will have to consider whether your behavior presents a disruption to the safe operation of this aircraft. Boots. There it was, the threat, dressed neatly in the language of policy. Marcus heard a phone camera click somewhere behind him. Boots. Then another. The woman in 3C had her phone low in her lap, angled up, her hand trembling slightly but steady enough to keep recording. Boots. Deborah noticed and went rigid. Captain, she whispered. This is exactly what I mean. He's turning the passengers against the crew. Boots. Marcus looked at her. No, he said, your actions are doing that. The word landed clean, and Deborah's face went the color of a slap. Boots. Holloway straightened. Mr. Dunmore, this is your final warning. Marcus's phone buzzed once more. He glanced down. Legal notified. HR reviewing prior complaints now. 6 separate incidents in the last 14 months, all naming Deborah Voss. Boots. Surveillance feed live and confirmed. Audio active in premium cabin and galley. He set the phone face down on the tray table without a word. Boots. Captain, he said quietly. I'm asking you to pause. Holloway's jaw flexed. This aircraft is not a courtroom. No, Marcus said. Boots. But it's still a place where people are responsible for what they do. The cabin went still again. No one spoke. Boots. Even Deborah stopped moving. For one long second, something flickered across Holloway's face that might, in a different man, have become doubt. Boots. Then pride made the decision for him. He keyed the radio clipped at his shoulder. Gate Ops, this is Captain Holloway on Highland Regional 219. Boots. We may need ground security at the aircraft door. A breath moved through the cabin. Sharp, collective, involuntary. Marcus looked out the window, then back at the captain, his voice never once losing its footing. Boots. Once you call security on a passenger for asking about discrimination, Captain, you don't get to pretend this was ever about a sandwich. Boots. Somewhere beyond the cockpit door, a story that was not true was already being carried down the jet bridge toward 2 men in yellow reflective vests. Boots. But this is the part that matters most, so remember it. Everything that happened in the next 11 minutes was being recorded. Every word, every face, every choice, and not one person standing in that aisle yet understood how completely it would come back around on them. Boots. 2 airport security officers boarded with a gate supervisor trailing behind them, and the temperature of the entire cabin dropped by 10 degrees in the time it took them to walk from the door to row 2. Boots. The taller officer had a hand resting near his radio, not his weapon, but close enough that everyone noticed. The gate supervisor, a heavy-set man named Douglas Farrow, carried a clipboard he clearly had no intention of actually using. Boots. This is the passenger, Holloway said, nodding toward Marcus without looking directly at him, refusing to comply with crew instructions. Boots. The shorter officer crouched slightly beside the seat. Sir, I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and step off the aircraft. Boots. Marcus did not move on what grounds? Crew reports a disruptive passenger. I have not stood from this seat, Marcus said. Boots. I have not raised my voice. I have asked why I was served spoiled food and denied the meal I paid for. Boots. That is the entirety of what has happened. Robert Kessling stood up so fast, his cane nearly toppled off the seat back pocket. Boots. Officer, I have been sitting 3 feet away this entire time. This man has done nothing but ask reasonable questions. Boots. Sir, please sit down, the taller officer said. I will not, Robert said, and something in his voice. Old money, old authority, the particular steel of a man who had spent 40 years being listened to, made even the officer hesitate half a step. Boots. I built 3 companies in this state. I know exactly what a disturbance looks like, and this isn't it. What I'm watching is a man being punished for noticing he was treated like garbage. Boots. The woman in 3C stood too, phone still raised, still recording, her voice shaking but not stopping. I have all of it on video. Boots. Every word, starting from the sandwich. Deborah's face drained of color. Ma'am, please put the phone away, Tyler said. No, she said. Boots. I don't think I will. For one frozen moment, and this is the first of them, so hold on to it, nobody in that cabin moved. Boots. The overhead lights hummed the same low hum they'd been humming since boarding. The champagne in 2C sat untouched, bubbles dying quietly in the glass. Boots. Somewhere far back in economy, a flight attendant's cart squeaked to a stop mid-azle, because word had already traveled that far. Boots. Every eye in first class was fixed on the same 6 feet of carpet between a black man who had not raised his voice once, and a captain who had just handed his authority over to 2 strangers in uniform. Boots. Then Marcus reached slowly, deliberately, into his jacket pocket, and the shorter officer's hand twitched toward his belt. It's a phone, Marcus said, holding it up, screen out so everyone could see. Boots. Nothing else. He dialed a number he had memorized 9 years earlier and had never once had to use in public. Boots. It rang twice. Then a voice came through, clipped and precise, loud enough that the row around him could hear both sides of the call. Boots. Renata Castellanos. Renata, it's Marcus. I need you on speaker in front of the flight crew of 219 right now. Boots. There was a half-second pause on the other end. The sound, unmistakable, of someone sitting up straighter in her chair. Boots. Putting you through to legal as we speak. Marcus, are you safe? For now, he said, and set the phone on the tray table's speaker up, facing the aisle. Boots. Holloway's face changed first. Not softened, not yet, but shifted. The way a man's face shifts when the ground under him has quietly become a different kind of ground. Boots. Who is this? This, Renata's voice said through the tiny speaker, flat and unhurried, is the Chief Human Resources Officer of Highland Regional Air, speaking to you from our Charlotte headquarters. Boots. Captain Holloway, I need you to confirm. Have you called ground security on Marcus Dunmore? Holloway's throat worked once before he answered. Boots. Yes. He was refusing. Marcus Dunmore, Renata said, cutting him off with the calm precision of someone who had rehearsed this exact sentence in her head 100 times without ever expecting to need it, sits on Highland Regional Air's Investor Advisory Board. Boots. He personally financed 40% of this aircraft's cabin refurbishment 18 months ago. He is not a disruptive passenger, Captain. Boots. He is one of the people whose money keeps your paycheck arriving on the 15th of every month. The cabin did not gasp. Boots. It went silent in a different way, the silence of a room recalibrating everything it had just watched. Deborah's arms slowly unfolded. Boots. Tyler took half a step backward, as though putting distance between himself and something radioactive. Karen's tablet slipped an inch in her grip before she caught it. Boots. Holloway said nothing at all. Officers, Renata continued, please stand down. There is no disturbance on that aircraft except the one your crew manufactured. Boots. And Captain, I strongly suggest you do not touch that radio again until legal has reviewed the full cabin recording. Boots. The taller security officer looked at his partner. His partner looked at the clipboard in Douglas Farrow's hand, which had, in the space of 90 seconds, become the single most useless object on the aircraft. Boots. The officer started, then simply stepped back toward the door instead of finishing the sentence. Deborah's mouth opened. Boots. Closed, opened again. I didn't know, she said, quiet, almost to herself. There's no way I could have known who he... Boots. That's the entire point, Marcus said, and for the first time since the sandwich had landed on his tray, his voice carried something sharper than calm. Boots. You weren't supposed to know. Nobody should have to announce who they are to be treated like a human being on a flight they paid for. Boots. Watch your hands now, because they matter one last time. They had gone from crossed and defiant to loose and trembling at her sides, the posture of someone realizing, all at once, that the ground she'd been standing on had never actually been there. Boots. Karen stepped forward, tablet still clutched tight. Mr. Dunmore, I want to personally apologize. Save it, Marcus said, not unkindly, but without a shred of interest either. Boots. I don't need an apology from someone still deciding whether to give me one, only because of what you just heard through that phone. Boots. Robert Kessling sat back down slowly, and something like grim satisfaction settled over his face. The woman in 3C lowered her phone at last, though she kept the recording running. Boots. Holloway stood in the aisle, a captain with 4 stripes on his shoulder and, for the first time in a long career, absolutely nothing useful left to say. Boots. Captain, Marcus said, I'd like to speak to the entire cabin before we depart. All of it, first class and economy both, if the intercom reaches that far. Boots. Holloway's jaw worked once. Then, without a word, he lifted the handset from the bulkhead and handed it across. Diane Marchetti, the senior flight service manager who had come forward from economy the moment word reached her, approached and said quietly, Whenever you're ready, Mr. Boots. Dunmore. Marcus looked down the aisle. First class was listening with the particular stillness of people who understand they are about to become part of a story larger than their own morning. Boots. Beyond the curtain, economy had been restless for 20 minutes. Missed connections, tightening schedules, half-formed rumors passed row to row. Boots. Some had heard fragments. Others had already caught pieces of video on their own phones, passed silently between setbacks. All of them, whether they knew it yet or not, were now part of the same story. Boots. He took the handset. The cabin speaker clicked once, softly, and his voice filled the aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Marcus Dunmore. Boots. I want to take a moment to explain why this flight has been delayed. The cabin went completely still. I boarded today as a passenger. Boots. I had a paid first-class ticket. I had a confirmed meal order. I expected exactly what every person on this aircraft should expect from an airline. Safe travel, fair service, basic respect. Boots. He paused. A few passengers lowered their eyes. Instead, I was denied the service I paid for, served food that was visibly spoiled, and when I asked reasonable questions about it, I was described as disruptive. Boots. Some of you saw that happen. Some of you spoke up when you didn't have to. I want to thank you. Boots. Robert Kessling bowed his head slightly. The woman in 3C wiped one cheek with the back of her hand. What happened this morning was never only about a sandwich, Marcus went on. Boots. It was about how quickly a calm question gets treated as a threat, the moment the person asking it doesn't fit somebody's idea of who belongs in a seat like this one. Boots. I am one of Highland Regional Air's private investors. I helped fund the changes this airline has made over the last 2 years, because I believed it could become something better. Boots. But belief isn't enough. Policy isn't enough. A training slide in an onboarding packet is not enough. A company becomes what it tolerates. Boots. The words landed heavy across the cabin. This incident is being reviewed as of this moment. The employees involved have been removed from this flight pending investigation. Boots. But I want to say this clearly, because it matters more than anything else I'll say today. Accountability should never depend on a passenger having power. Boots. It should not depend on a phone call to a headquarters office. It should not depend on a camera recording in someone's lap. Boots. Every person on this aircraft deserved better than what almost happened here from the very first minute. A low murmur moved through the cabin. Not anger now, something closer to recognition. Boots. I'm sorry for the delay this has caused everyone here. Your time matters. Your plans matter. And discrimination, even when it's aimed at one person, doesn't stay contained to that person. Boots. It spreads. It teaches everyone watching that silence is safer than speaking up. It creates a kind of fear that outlasts the flight it happened on. Boots. Diane looked at him, her expression grave and steady. So Highland Regional Air will be refunding every ticket on this aircraft in full, Marcus said. Boots. Every passenger will also receive a travel credit equal to a future domestic round trip, and our executive office will personally assist anyone whose connections have been affected by today's delay. Boots. A gasp moved through the cabin. Somewhere in economy, a voice called out, "Are you serious?" Marcus did not smile. "Boots. This isn't a prize," he said. "It's responsibility." He let the words sit in the silence for a moment. "And once we land, I will personally ask the board to review every discrimination complaint filed against this airline over the past 5 years. Boots. Not to protect the company, to protect the people who trusted us to do better than this." He handed the handset back to Diane. Boots. For a moment there was nothing, no sound, no movement. The particular silence that comes after something true has finally been said out loud in a room full of people who all felt it land at once. Boots. Then Robert Kessling stood slowly, one hand braced on his cane, and began to clap. One clap, then another. The woman in 3C joined him, then the rest of first class, then. Carrying back through the curtain in a wave nobody had organized, economy. Boots. The sound filled the cabin not like celebration but like release, the particular sound of a room finally allowed to exhale. Boots. Marcus sat back down by the window, exhausted in a way no amount of sleep would fix. Outside, the runway stretched out gray and wet under a low Atlanta sky. Boots. Inside the cabin something had shifted, not healed, not yet. But seen, and being seen he had learned a long time ago, was always the first and hardest part. Boots. Flight 219 arrived in Denver 2 hours and 11 minutes late, but nobody rushed off the aircraft the way passengers usually do. Boots. They stood slowly, quietly, filing out in a hush that felt almost like reverence, as if moving too fast would somehow disrespect what they'd all just watched together. Boots. Marcus stayed in seat 2A until the aisle had cleared. His overcoat was folded over one arm. His phone had filled with messages, from the board, from legal, from Priya, from a dozen people who had suddenly understood that one moldy sandwich had cracked open something much larger than a single bad flight. Boots. At the aircraft door, Captain Holloway stopped him. His shoulders had lost the rigid set they'd held for most of the flight. Boots. "Mr. Dunmore," he said, "I hope the rest of the flight gave you at least a little peace." Marcus looked back down the aisle. The same seats, the same overhead bins, an entirely different feeling in the air. Boots. "It gave me clarity," he said, and walked past him into the jet bridge. In the terminal, Renata Castellanos was waiting with a small team from the Denver office. Boots. No cameras, no press line, just tired faces and thick folders held against their chests. "We reviewed the cabin footage during the flight," Renata said. Boots. "It's all there. The meal, the comments, the false disruption report to security. Every second of it." Douglas Farrow, the gate supervisor who had followed the security officers on board, added quietly, "Deborah Voss and Tyler Grissom are suspended pending termination review." Boots. "Captain Holloway is grounded pending a full command review. Karen Ashby is on administrative leave, required to cooperate fully." Marcus nodded. Boots. The words mattered. They didn't make him feel lighter. Justice rarely does. It isn't joy. It's only the moment the truth finally stops being ignored. Boots. The next morning, in a boardroom on the 14th floor of Highland Regional Air's Charlotte headquarters, the room went silent as the footage played once on the wall screen. Boots. Nobody asked to see it a second time. Deborah's tight smile. Tyler's dismissive glance at the sandwich. Captain Holloway keying the radio. Boots. Marcus sitting perfectly still with spoiled food in front of him, refusing to give anyone the reaction they were counting on. Boots. Then the complaints appeared on screen. Not one, not two, years of them. Passengers describing the exact same pattern in different words across different flights. Boots. Cold service, extra scrutiny, missing meals, concerns dismissed with a smile and a travel voucher instead of an answer. Boots. One complaint, filed 14 months earlier by a woman named Odessa Frayne, described almost the identical sequence. A spoiled breakfast plate, a request for the meal she'd pre-ordered, a flight attendant who told her, in nearly the same words, that she should be grateful for what was available. Boots. The case had been closed within 72 hours, marked resolved, with a $200 travel credit and no further action. Another, filed by a retired Army colonel named Desmond Waters, described being asked twice for identification to confirm his own first-class seat on a route he had flown monthly for 6 years. Boots. That one had been closed even faster. Marcus read both files twice before he looked up. Nobody in this room is asking how a woman got 14 months and 6 documented complaints into a career at this airline, without a single serious consequence, he said. Boots. I am asking that, and I expect an answer by Friday. Marcus stood at the head of the table. This company didn't fail because one employee made one cruel choice on one Tuesday morning, he said. Boots. It failed because too many people, for too many years, learned that ignoring cruelty was easier than confronting it. Nobody interrupted him. Boots. Not this time. Boots. By noon, the board had approved a full review of every discrimination complaint filed in the last 5 years. Mandatory retraining for every customer-facing employee at the airline, an independent passenger equity panel with real authority to act, and a new requirement that any serious complaint be reviewed by at least 2 separate departments before it could quietly disappear into a file. Boots. By evening, Highland Regional Air issued a public statement that did not hide behind soft language. It named what had happened. Boots. It apologized to its passengers, plainly, without qualification. It promised reform with actual dates attached and actual names and actual oversight that anyone could check on later. Boots. 6 months passed. On a bright March morning, Marcus Dunmore boarded Highland Regional Air Flight 219 again. Same route, same window seats, same early hour. Boots. Morning light came soft and gold through the oval window. The cabin smelled like fresh coffee and clean leather instead of stale champagne and bad excuses. Boots. A new flight attendant, a woman named Lisa Torres, greeted every single passenger with the same steady, unhurried warmth as she moved down the aisle. Boots. When she reached row 2, she smiled without a trace of performance in it. Good morning, Mr. Dunmore. Your pre-ordered meal is confirmed, and we'll have your Macallan 18 ready, right after takeoff. Boots. Would you like water before we push back? Marcus studied her face for a moment. No suspicion in it, no calculation. Boots. Just service, offered the way it should always have been offered, to everyone, from the very beginning. Yes, he said. Boots. Thank you. A few minutes later, Robert Kessling appeared in the aisle, moving slowly on his cane. Marcus looked up, surprised. Boots. Robert grinned. Couldn't resist taking this route one more time, he said, easing into 2C. Wanted to see if this airline actually learned anything, or if it just got better at pretending. Boots. Marcus almost laughed. And? Robert glanced around the cabin. The warm light, the unhurried service, the ordinary calm of a flight where nothing needed to be proven by anyone. Boots. So far, he said, I'd say somebody finally listened. Marcus told him quietly about Odessa Frayne, the woman whose complaint had sat closed and forgotten for 14 months. Boots. Highland Regional Air had reopened her file, called her personally, and, at her request, not the company's suggestion, flown her out to Charlotte to sit on the new passenger equity panel herself. Boots. She'd told the board in her first meeting that she didn't want an apology. She wanted the next person who filed a complaint like hers to be believed the first time, not the fourth. Boots. Robert listened to all of it without saying a word, then nodded once, the way men like him nod, when something has finally been done the right way. Boots. As the aircraft lifted off the runway and banked north over Atlanta, Marcus watched the city fall away beneath the clouds and thought, not for the first time, about power. Boots. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that humiliates a stranger to feel bigger for a moment. The kind that opens a door quietly and holds it open long enough for the next person to walk through without having to ask permission. Boots. He had been underestimated at the gate that morning. Then, eventually, he had been heard. But the real victory was never that people finally learned who he was. Boots. The real victory would be the day none of that mattered anymore. The day a man could sit in seat 2A, unnamed and unremarkable, and still be treated exactly the way he deserved from the very first moment the tray touched the table. Boots. Because respect was never supposed to require a title, or a phone call to headquarters, or a business card. It was supposed to begin the second a person walked through the door. Boots. If this story stayed with you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognize someone in it, maybe even yourself, sitting in a room deciding whether to speak or stay quiet, leave it here for someone who needs to hear it too. Boots. Share it with someone who still believes silence keeps the peace. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been in that cabin, in that moment, on either side of it? I read every answer.